Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome to Resiliency Matters. Today, we're speaking with Scott Mann, a Green Beret veteran and founding director of the nonprofit Hero's Journey. Scott is also our Worldmaker 2023 Hope Builder honoree. So welcome and congratulations, Scott.
Oh, thank you so much, Molly. That is just such a humbling thing, and I feel like I honestly, and I don't mean this to be cliche, like I am accepting that on a whole bunch of wonderful storytellers and advocates for the veteran community. So it's humbling. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we stand on the shoulders of a lot of people and we sit in the seat for a lot of people, don't we?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So Scott, I want to talk about the Hope Builder Award and read, who this award is presented to. So it's for a leader who responded to great adversity with courage and hope, showing us how to transform our heartbreak into a better world for everyone. So where does this description take you? What do you want to say about being a hope builder?
Well, I think for me, not so much on the courage. I don't think I have a ton of that, but I definitely believe the hope is something that really gives me a lot. It's very humbling because, hope is something people are starving for right now, and storytelling gives hope. And as a storyteller, that's something that I really take a lot of pride in. The other piece is the struggle, is taking our struggle, I call it our scars, and being generous with those scars and the stories that we tell in the service of others. And I've really tried to dedicate my life to that ever since I got out of the military and faced my own mental health challenges. So this award, this honoring, it means more than you know.
Well, thank you. And yeah, that vulnerability that it takes to bring forth and share your stories and your scars to benefit others, to strengthen lives and save lives in the work you're doing. So let's provide some context. Could you talk a bit about your military service, whether you want to do that in years or your tours?
Yeah. Well, I spent almost 23 years in the Army, and about 18 of that was as a Green Beret. And really, for folks that a lot of people get us confused with Navy SEALs and other elite forces, and kind of we're different in that we work by, with, and through indigenous people to help them stand up on their own, whereas most of your other elite forces conduct unilateral operations. They operate on their own and they do surgical strike kind of things, whereas we work by, with, and through. We build relationships and then we help people stand up on their own. And that's something I did for about 18 years in places all over the world, from Peru to Colombia to Ecuador to Afghanistan. And it was something I wanted to do since I was 14 years old, Molly. It's a dream I've had since I was a kid, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life.
Well, thank you for all of that, all of the ways that you have served our country and continue to serve our country and veterans and families. Let's step into talking about your nonprofit, the Hero's Journey, because that's kind of the container for a lot of that work that you continue.
It really is. My wife and I co-founded the Hero's Journey, and the reason for it was I had a very dark transition. It was not a good transition. It was not a healthy transition. I retired from the Army in 2013, and I kind of thought I had the world by the tail. I was retiring on my terms. I was about to write a book. I had a good job as a contractor. My marriage was intact. My kids were at home. So everything looked like it was supposed to. But within just a few months of taking off those desert boots and putting on the Tampa Bay flip-flops, the snakes in my head started to squirm quite a bit. And I found myself really just trying to just navigate the day absent of purpose and passion and all of the things that had made me tick since I was a 14-year-old kid, and at 41 years old, I'm asking myself, is this it? Is this what is this the run that I was going to do? And my identity was just like, it was gone. And I started to go through, and then that just opened the door for all of the things that I had pushed down for years, the PTS, the moral injury, the guilt in particular. And before long, I was standing in my closet holding a pistol and no intention of coming out. And had it not been for a few events that day, I wouldn't have. But on the other side of that, I got connected with a civilian storyteller who really helped me see the power of story to heal myself, to bridge the civil military gap. And it had such a profound impact on me and gave me my life back and a new career and hope, that I decided, my wife and I decided to help other warriors find their voice and tell their story. And that's what the hero's journey is all about.
I love that. And I love that it's that partnership with you and your wife.
For sure.
Um, so what brought us together was the play that you wrote and that you, I say star in, I don't know if you like that word, you act in, you take the lead. But it's called, I think you're a star, Scott. It's called Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. So let's start with that word because it's not commonly used, but what is elegy and why did you title it the way that you titled it?
Well, elegy is a lament for the dead, and it is kind of an underused word. And I found it to be very appealing in the subtitle. And the reason behind it was in 2015 or 16, I started looking around. My son was going in the Army, my oldest son, and I thought, man, he's going to go fight a war that I didn't finish. And I just, what do you do with that? You know, what do you do with something where your son was 3 when the towers fell, and now he's a second lieutenant in the Army? You know, and most of the country didn't even know we were in Afghanistan at that time. And so I was already a speaker. I was already into storytelling a good bit. And several of my coaches and mentors were suggesting to me that I write a play. I write a play about the war and I tell the story from the stage because that's a really good way to help civilians understand the cost of war and to validate those that served. And I'd never written a play and I certainly never acted in a play. But it was one of those things, you know, how a lot of the things in our life, they kind of come to us from another place. And that's what happened here. And I just started moving the pen. And this subtitle, Elegy of a Green Beret, I had read Hillbilly Elegy and that way of life. I'm from Appalachia and just that lament, it's more of a lament for a way of life. And it seemed to me that all the stories and movies were about the first in, and very few people told the stories of the last out of Afghanistan, the men and women who go back day after day, month after month, year after year, and the families that love them and support them. And certainly our fallen and what a Gold Star family goes through when they lose someone. And most of the country is just moving along as if they don't even know what it's all about. And so it's an elegy on so many different levels. It's an elegy for my character. Danny is mortally wounded in the first scene, and it's about his ascent and letting go into Valhalla. But it's also an elegy for a way of life. It's an elegy for a group of people, less than 1% of our population, who served voluntarily for almost 20 years. And we've turned the page on them. And it's a lament for them and their service as well.
So let's talk about the objectives. You're touching upon them, and I really want to make them clear for our listeners. So one of the objectives, let's start with helping American people understand the costs of war, because as you say, many don't. So talk a bit more about that and how you bring that forth in the play and in your broader work.
Well, I just think there's such a misperception, a misconception of what modern war really is. You know, most people think it's like a Fortnite video game where, you know, you do this cool guy stuff and then you come home and it's just, if something happens to you, you just respawn and you go back in. People just don't have a grasp of the impact of war on a family. And particularly when they go back and forth over and over and over again. And it was important for me that I helped civilians better understand that, because to me, if we're going, we keep sending these men and women, the same ones, over and over to combat. And whether it's in Syria or whether it's in the Gulf of, you know, the Mediterranean Sea, or whether it's in Afghanistan, it's just this small group of people that just keep deploying, and their families that just keep cracking under this strain. And if we're going to do that, if we're going to continue to send those men and women to fight like that, we sure as hell better know what it is that we're asking them to do. We need to have some kind of emotional connection to what that cost is. It's not just something that we can be removed from and not pay attention to. And that's exactly what's happened in the Afghanistan war. The way we turned the page on that, and people just moved on as if it never even happened, like it was ServPro, you know, it never even happened. And so that was the first thing for me, is I felt like if I could write a story that really was personal, because what's personal is universal in storytelling. If you sit in the audience and you watch Danny my character hold his newborn boy and then say goodbye to his wife at the airfield and then hold his best friend in his final moments. And you see the guilt on Danny's face as he pulls his pistol out. Like all of those things, you start to feel them and there's an emotional connection to it and you go on the ride with him. Then hopefully that leaves people with an impression when they leave that theater, regardless of their politics, that they have a deeper appreciation of what it means to send our young people to war. Not in a good way, not in a bad way, but in an honest way.
And another thing this play does, and even when you were talking, Scott, about your background and your service, right? It is a personal story. There's so much integration between you and Danny that as I was watching it and getting to know you better, it's just really interesting, how woven together that story is. And I know that's to support the objective of honoring and validating the journey of our warriors and their families and our Gold Star families. Anything else you want to say about that?
I appreciate you calling that out. I mean, I think it's important to note that all of our cast are veterans or military family members. Only a few of them are professionally trained actors. The rest of us have trained diligently, but not, we don't act full time. And being able to embody a character that's based on 3 team sergeants that actually lived and bring them to life, as well as other events that I saw and witnessed, is a very, very special thing. And it's mostly physical. The storytelling is a physical thing. It's in your body. It's how you breathe. It's what you're connected to. It's your feet on the ground. And that has been, for me, a very healing process that I hope to continue well into the future.
Yeah, and I think the reason that works is because trauma is a very physical thing that gets in your cells and gets in your body. And so, you need to move it through in one way or another.
How to metabolize it. And storytelling is a great way to do it.
Yeah, we're gonna talk more about that. Let's hit that last objective, which is really to help people talk about tough subjects. One of our missions, destigmatizing post-traumatic stress, moral injury, some big topics, and really helping people talk about them. So let's wrap this segment with you talking about tough stuff.
We have some hard conversations because combat is a difficult thing. It's corrosive. It includes trauma and guilt and a moral injury and other things. And storytelling opens us up. Storytelling allows us to listen autobiographically and be transported into these different worlds. And we call the play our emotional breaching tool. It opens up husbands and wives to hard conversations, dads able to talk to their kids about PTS. And that isn't just for the play, that's anything in life. Storytelling is a breaching tool that opens us up and gets us ready to listen to those hard conversations we have to have. And we try to model that on the stage and in the talkbacks that we do after the show.
Excellent. Well, more about moral injury storytelling, these talkbacks. We're going to keep going on this conversation. Viewers, stay tuned.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Oh boy. Our back and forth. It always came back. Dad! You probably don't remember what you told me.
That was perfect.
But I heard every word.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Or maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. But I can't.
Welcome back to Resiliency Matters. We're speaking with Scott Mann, a Green Beret veteran and a storyteller. Scott, we've been talking about your play Last Out, and I saw your play in Milwaukee, and there was a line that I felt it was very subtle, but it just went, oh. And you've already talked about your own son going off to serve. in the play, a man, the Green Beret's son, is going off to serve, and he's almost saying a prayer over him, and says something, I'll paraphrase, but may you not die by the hand of your enemy or by your own hand.
Yeah.
And so that being in the work of suicide protection and prevention, and the work that that we do in human resilience, that was just like brilliant in its subtlety and poignancy, right? So let's talk, we've been talking about hard stuff, right? Let's talk about the epidemic of military connected suicide.
I said this when I testified to the House Foreign Affairs Committee shortly after the Afghanistan withdrawal. I believe that we are on the front end of a mental health tsunami. We have seen a lot of indicators. Specifically, we were already in trouble before the collapse in Afghanistan. Following the collapse of Afghanistan and the way we left our allies, I believe we're looking at a moral injury rate that is of epic proportions. And you are seeing it in increases in suicide. We're seeing it in calls to the VA. There were 88,000 calls to the VA hotline in March, the most on record. And just in doing the play, Mollie, and traveling around the country, I've witnessed and listened to in the talkbacks and in stories with veterans after the show that we're up against something really diabolical here. And veteran suicide is not going to get better. And unfortunately, nobody else is coming. I don't see anything coming over the horizon on the white horse from our institutional leadership that is going to, have a dent in this thing. And so I think it's up to us. I think it's going to have to be community-based solutions, bottom-up solutions. Certainly what we're doing with the storytelling, we think is having a big impact on that. And like you just talked about, you praised a line from my character, Danny, who is looking out over his son, who Danny has passed. And what he says specifically is, I'm okay. I'm all right. Don't be in a hurry to join me here by the enemy's hand or your own. And I think that is an important contextual piece too, is, don't allow the vengeance or the guilt or whatever it is that you're feeling about the loss of a loved one or the loss of a friend to make you in a hurry to go seek vengeance or to take your own life or whatever it is you're thinking about, self-harm, because I'm okay. And that's one of the things that I believe, because it's an elegy and because my character in a Shakespearean way has passed, he can say whatever the hell he needs to say. And in this case, and it land the way it landed with you. I think if my character were alive and he were just, exposition, I don't think it would land the same way. And so I'm just grateful for that. I feel like that came from a different place, from a higher power for me. And a lot of those lines did. And a lot of those lines came from what I hope my buddies feel where they are.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And a piece of that did, go over. Well, I got so much from it. But, it's not just the father who died and is saying that to his son, but there's so many people who've lost buddies and have lost. And sometimes it just might feel a little easier to join them versus dealing, when those problems just feel too big, right, in their own lives here.
Yeah.
And I want to also,
one of the things I would say real quick is that when I deliver that line, is I look for people in the audience, and when I say by the enemy's hand or your own, I look right into the audience and break the fourth wall, and I try to find the person who needs to hear that. And I believe, again, in a spiritual way, I find them, or at least somebody that needs to hear it, and they hear it like you did. And not that you're necessarily in that place, but it's just, you needed to hear that line, and looking out into the audience and making eye contact during that moment is something that I really cherish.
And another thing you do so wisely is you have clinicians available. So if people need help and if things are getting activated, and you have a couple clinicians I talked to from the Cohen clinics, but they're there as an additional resource. Absolutely.
It's imperative. And I think we do it for every show, and we always will.
And we've talked about the similarities, even though I'm more of an academic and we do workshops and you're creative and you're doing plays. We also have a clinician in the room. Another thing that we share is that you call them talkbacks, and we do feedback. Sometimes it's surveys, but we are always wanting to know, what was your experience, and what questions do you have, and listening and refining. And you really have continued that process since the beginning. So talk about why that's important and how it's added value to the quality of what you're doing.
Well, I had never written a play. I'd never performed a play as an actor, and I'd certainly never put one on tour. And my mentor, Bo, who was a very accomplished actor, and he wrote a one-person show about his journey to the NFL. And he told me, he said, Scott, when you do this play and you put it on tour, this was back in 2018. He said, after every show, you need to do a talk back with the audience. You need to come out there because the audience is smart. And, if you allow yourself and you allow the play to be in development and you tell the audience that, they will give you feedback and they will help you write this show to get it to a razor's edge. And so we did that for 30 cities. We would tell the audience, this is your time to talk to us. A lot of the scenes that you saw in that play, to include the scream that Danny's wife does when she gets a certain amount of news, that came from the audience. And I believe that, so there's that. But then there's also this notion of shared perspective, which is something we have almost none of at a community level anymore, at a civil society level. Shared perspective is a scarcity. But when we do this, you have Democrats, Republicans, Blacks, whites, Hispanics, military, non-military, sitting in a room together going for this ride where Danny Patton and his family is the universal singular and everybody is at his shoulder. And when it's over, these conversations that are going back and forth in the audience, everyone leaves there with shared perspective about a very hard topic. And I think that's something that really offers some insight for all of us at a community level. If we're going to move through these hard things like veteran suicide and mental health and, even the division in our country, it's hard to hate the storytellers. If we listen to each other's stories, we emerge with shared perspective. And I think that's a piece of social capital that we desperately need today.
I agree with that. I want to unpack one term we've referred to a couple of times, and maybe it's not everybody's common knowledge. So let's do a little of that here. A moral injury, that's a big term. And so the way I see it is just when your moral compass is violated, when you have been asked to do something, or you witness something, or you're prevented from taking action that violates your personal values. So talk about the role of that, and if you want to use it in the context of how we evacuated from Afghanistan or some of the issues in the play. But let's talk a little bit more about moral injury.
Yeah, I think it's an emerging condition that has kind of been blown off, honestly, by a lot of our senior leaders. But it's a very real thing. I think that healthcare workers deal with it when they're not allowed to treat someone with COVID or engage them in the way that they've been taught to do, in a humanitarian way, and there's a violation of one's value code, and it's an injury on the soul, which is a really diabolical injury, because I think it accelerates and accentuates the other things like trauma and PTS and survivor's guilt. It underpins it and inflames it almost. And I know for me, when Afghanistan collapsed and we abandoned our allies and the men and women that we had fought with, I'm here because of them in many cases. And then we're just told it's over. Don't do anything. And you're watching them on video be executed. And you were taught your entire adult life that you never leave a partner on the battlefield. And all of a sudden the leaders that held us to that account are doing it. And they're sitting silent. That has had an exponential effect on our veteran mental health. And it is not just special operators, it's Marines, it's Air Force. Anybody that worked in that country was conditioned that it is Shona Bashona, which is Dari for shoulder to shoulder. All of us were held to that standard. And then to just all of a sudden be, pretend like it didn't happen and to look away. It has had a profound impact on our mental health. And I think that's not going to go away. We have to deal with that. We have to move from moral injury to moral recovery. And, like you said, there's a lot of ambiguity on that. We don't have a lot of information on that, but we're going to have to step into it, or we're going to lose our warfighters and their families at an epic rate.
And we already are. You and I've had that discussion when I work deep in a community with the guys, and what these guys do and look like, that they're first there if a warrior's in trouble and with suicide.
Yeah.
intervention, and they're reporting that they're seeing an increase of 35-40% of suicide after the evacuating Afghanistan. So I think we really do need to shine a light on it, and we need to allow for the grief and allow for that processing. So let's kind of bring it back to storytelling, because you were carrying so much of that. Tell us a little bit more about how storytelling has served you personally to help you make sense of some of the past, to help you kind of engage more fully in the present and have some clarity of where you're headed.
Well, you know this better than anybody, that the brain has a mandate to make sense of the world, to seek out and assign meaning to what we do. It's how we're wired. And storytelling is a sense-making tool. It has been for 70,000 years. We've been telling stories far longer than we've had written language. And so storytelling allows the person in the audience or the listener to listen to another person's story autobiographically, and then locate themselves in that story and process their own lived experience in the safety of another person's narrative. So, for example, Danny goes through moral injuries in the play. He is forced to abandon Malik John and the other elders that stood up for their village after he asked them to do that. And he has to deal with that and confront that with Colonel Smith and others. And in doing so, the audience can listen to that and autobiographically listen and go for that ride and process their own moral injuries in the safety of that narrative. And that is what we call narrative transportation. And it allows people to make sense of their own lived experience through another person's story. It's one of the most generous things we can do as leaders, is to take our own struggles, our own scars, and be generous with them and share them in the form of story in the service of others. And that's what this whole play is about. But that's what storytelling in general can offer us. Out of that trauma, out of that grief, out of that loss, reside lessons that we can make sense of our own life when people are generous enough to share it.
Yeah, and even without understanding the term moral injury, they can sit there and say, that's not fair, or that's the injustice, right? It's going to resonate with something in them. And then once you have that cohesion of values, you have some shared values, I think then you have a place from which you can have true dialogue and begin that healing.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll just end with this and throw it back to you, but storytelling is in all of us. You don't have to be an actor. You don't have, it pays to train on it, but find ways to share your struggles through stories in the service of others. Even when you talk to your kids about addiction or being bullied, it's powerful stuff, and the world's hungry for it.
Thank you. And there's a whole line of research that type of generational storytelling builds resilience in your kids. So yes, do be sharing those stories around the dinner table and with your families. Thank you so much, Scott. Congratulations, and thank you for accepting and being our hope builder. Thank you, viewers, for joining us on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.